Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to spend some time talking about a very important skill that I think is ignored very often within our lessons, and that is the very necessary and important skill of sight reading. Now, why do we need to be good sight readers? I think the answer is very obvious. It's impractical and not realistic to think that everything that we're going to play is going to be memorized. I mean, we can obviously do that when we're preparing for recitals, for competitions. We can memorize away, but how often do we need to be able to sight read a piece on the spot? We might be demonstrating for our students. We might be accompanying an instrumentalist or a choir. The list goes on and on, maybe trying out new music. We have to be skilled and capable of being able to have music set in front of us and to be able to quickly read through it. Now, it might not be perfect, but we can still be competent enough to be able to make it work. And I promise you, this skill can't be gained overnight. It has to be developed through consistency with time, attention, focus. Just like our scales, learning how to play scales up and down the keyboard, sight reading needs to be done on a daily basis. And I guarantee you, promise you, that if you do that, you're going to find that the skill really improves and it can become a strength. And you can become known as the one that people turn to accompany just because you are so good at it. And in the end, it can even actually make you a better pianist because you can learn and get to that point of memorizing repertoire sooner because you can sight through the piece quite easily. So how is that done? These are the steps that I want to go through with you today. There are basic steps that I think makes a very thorough analysis. And obviously today it's going to take longer to walk you through those steps, but I tell my students that once they become more comfortable with these steps, they should be able to run through them all in about a minute or less. You can do a very quick analysis and be ready to go in less than a minute. So I want to show you what those steps are today. The piece that I chose to sight read for you, just as an example, is just the first line of Haydn's Minuet in G major. And you have to realize as a teacher, we need to be capable of being able to give our students the correct level of sight reading. And obviously that will depend upon their skill level. I'm a little tiny beginner. I'm going to give them something from a brand new beginner method book. It could be 2 measures long, 3 measures long, 1 hand only, but something that gets them having to look up at music that they have not seen before and read it through. A more advanced student, I'm going to find something that is going to push them more, but definitely be within their grasp, because I think a mistake that we can sometimes make is giving our students something that's too difficult for them. And if they're stuttering through and stumbling because it's beyond their ability to sight read on the spot, then that's not going to encourage them, and instead it's going to discourage them, and they won't feel that energy that comes from being able to sight read something well the first time through. Because that truly is what sight reading is being able to play it smoothly first time through. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with just 1 line. Usually 1 line a day I think is just fine. You can extend that to 2 lines, 3 lines, depending on how advanced the student is. But for me, it's more about a matter of being consistent and forcing yourself to sight read through something new every day. And it can be anything. Like I said, I typically just pull books from off my shelf for my students to sight read through. I tell the students at home, try to pull from old books that they might have. Most of us have old books that we haven't played through before. I know that there are methods that have specific sight reading books. Bastion, I've used Bastion in the past. They have sight reading books, I believe it's levels 1 through 5, and it's 1 line a day. And those are good too, but we typically are sight reading so much in my studio that we go through those books so quickly, it hardly seems practical to buy those. And instead I like and encourage my students to just pull from old music books. So today, as I said, we're going to sight read through Minuet in G major. And the steps for analysis, I'm going to go through each one of these. And they are quite basic, but you cannot forget these basic steps when doing analysis, or else you're going to miss something when it comes to performing it. You're going to have missed one of these steps. So it's very important that we go through all of them, and you will get fast at the analysis through time and practice, I promise you. So just like reading words on a page, we are going to read through our piece in analysis from left to right. Very important that we start from the very beginning. We can't skip any of these steps, because if we do, something's going to end up being wrong. And our goal is to play it perfect, as close to perfect first time through. So very first, what do we see on our grand staff? To the very left, it is our clef signs. We first and foremost need to go through and check to see that our clefs are in the right place. Do we have a treble clef and a bass clef? Or do we have both hands in the treble clef, both hands in the bass clef? As I skim through this line, are the clefs going to change? Not in this example, so I'm good with clefs. Next, we have our key signature. Now I notice I have an F sharp in my key signature. So I know that this piece is either going to be in the key of G major, or it's going to be in the key of E minor. Now it's important to know whether you're expecting a major sound or a minor sound, because I've had students assume automatically that it's going to be in a major key, and then when they start playing and they find out it's in a minor key, it kind of jolts them and they think they're playing wrong notes, and so they stutter and stop. And so that's why it's important to distinguish whether it's going to be that major or minor key. I always encourage the student to look at the very bottom note of the last measure, final note, because that's usually the key that we end in, our tonic. And I notice that we have a G in the bass clef, so that's going to confirm my key of G major. Now, never mind that my title said Minuet in G major, giving it away. We don't always have the luxury of having our title give us the key, so we need to know our key signatures. At the same time, I'll also take advantage of skimming through this line to see if there are any added accidentals that I need to be aware of and to include within the excerpt. Nothing is written here, so I'm good. As long as I sharp my Fs, I'll be just fine. After my key signature, what comes next on our grand staff? And it is our meter. I notice that this example is in 3/4, so there will be 3 beats per measure. And with my 4 on the bottom, my quarter note is going to receive 1 beat. So in order to really absorb that meter and that pulse, to prepare myself to be able to play it through, I encourage the student to tap it out in their lap. Now when the right hand plays, the right hand should be tapping. When the left hand plays, the left hand should be tapping. And when they play together, both hands should be tapping. So this is how I would count it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and. Once I've done that, I'm really feeling that pulse of 3, and I'm going to be much more likely to play it with the correct rhythm than if I don't go through that step of tapping out the rhythm. Once I've done that, I'm going to now play through it in my lap, on my imaginary keyboard, on my lap. So I want you to picture here that you're really getting the chance to play it on a real keyboard. So I'm talking great detail. You find your opening notes in right hand and left hand, and you really find them on your lap. Think of Rubinstein, the great concert pianist Rubinstein, who memorized and polished and perfected an entire concerto on his train ride to his performance, most likely on a tabletop. I know that's a really awesome story, and I have a really hard time believing that. But nonetheless, it's out there. We've all heard it before, and if Rubinstein can do that, then we can do our practice on our imaginary piano to prepare ourselves to be able to play our little excerpt of sight reading as perfect as possible. So focus. This takes some real focus. And I'm going to play it like this, finding my notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now I've just walked through this exercise on my imaginary piano. Now maybe we might struggle on one of the measures and we're off with our interval. And so we can maybe spot that again on our imaginary piano. But we want to become comfortable with how the notes are shifting and practicing it in our lap, always looking ahead, because I think that is obviously one of the most important skills when we're sight reading, is that we're always looking ahead and going at a slow enough tempo that we can. I think a mistake that we can easily fall into is starting off too quickly, especially if we're nervous, and then we can't keep up. Our fingers can't keep up with the pulse. So regardless of what tempo the piece is supposed to be played at, it's always more important to go at a slightly slower tempo so that you can maintain accuracy and pulse, because that is what matters most. Now, once I've gone through all of these steps, I could quickly place my hands on the keys and start playing it, but we have to finish off our analysis with the icing on the cake, which is looking at any additional comments that are on the score from the editor, from the composer. I'm noticing here that my notes have some fingering above and underneath them. So that's going to be something I will observe, because it's going to make it easier to be able to get to my notes and to play more accurately. I also noticed that my eighth notes have slurs over them. And so that's telling me that I need to make sure that I play those smooth and connected and not detached. I noticed that the dynamic sign is a mezzo forte, so I'm going to play the piece at a medium loud dynamic. And I also noticed that the tempo in Italian above the first measure says andante moderato, so I know that the speed is a medium walking tempo. There's no pedal written in, so I obviously don't need to worry about that. And once I've noticed all of those final details, it's now time to play through the example. Now, it's important that you stress to your students that the very, very most important step when all of the analysis is complete is that no matter what, there is no stopping of any kind, and you have to keep going no matter what. That might sound easy when I say that out loud, but I guarantee you, once you start playing, that is one of the most difficult things to be able to do, unless you've trained yourself to do that through practice and repetition. Because when we play a wrong note, the natural response is to go back and to want to fix it. We're all that way. If we have a wrong rhythm, we want to go back and play it the right way. But the second we do that, we interrupt that pulse. And the most important part of accompanying is to keep that pulse going no matter what. Because if we're accompanying someone, they're not going to stop if we make a mistake. It's our job to keep that constant pulse, even if that means dropping the left hand out for a minute, or if we play a wrong note, we pretend we played a correct note. And I guarantee you, half the time, if you keep that pulse spot on, most people will never know, even if you have one of these errors. But when you stop, you interrupt pulse and you go back, that's when people realize that you are making mistakes. So let me play it for you. All my analysis is done. As I become more used to this skill through practice, I'm going to be able to run through all of those steps, as I mentioned, in a minute or less. And here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 I'm done. Seems simple enough, right? I encourage you to incorporate sight reading within your private piano studios. I think you'll be doing your students so much good by having them focus on it regularly. And they'll be able to be wonderful accompanists one day and to be able to do a lot more with their piano playing than just feel restricted to having to memorize music because they're not comfortable at reading music instantly. I also encourage you as teachers and as pianists to continue the skill, to keep it up, to encourage yourself to keep building and pushing your skills. Pull out your Beethoven sonatas and force yourself to read through a page a day. I remember that was something that I was encouraged to do in college, and I try to stick to that best I can. I'm not perfect, I don't do it every single day, but I really notice a difference when I do, because we can always be continuing to develop that skill of sight reading and to become better. I've enjoyed being able to talk to you today about sight reading. Use it, and I hope that this has been beneficial. If you enjoy the content of what I am putting out there on YouTube, I encourage you to click and subscribe to my channel so that you can hear about any other new videos that I post. And I look forward to next time.